Okay, so how's everybody doing? So this is going to be a fairly comprehensive series on how to scratch build this particular tug in HO 187 scale, which is the Seaspan Corsair 4-river road layout. It's going to be moored alongside of the barge slip there. It was always in the plan. It just came up on the build production schedule, and I'm going to do it now. Some had asked me about the ferry. That's later, after this one probably, or in between something. So I want to first of all start this with the introduction on how to draft a builder's drawing from a photograph. And this method that I'm going to show you is a pre-digital method, sort of hands-on tactile approach, and it's good for any subject. Building, vehicles, trees, like the whole scene even, like a whole layout. You can use a grid pattern for ratio and balance and so on. It's not that complicated really, but let's just start with an example like this. So I know roughly that this boat, I found this out, that it's roughly 80 feet long by 24 feet wide. There's some other increments there like 82.8, but just for the purposes of this video, I want to simplify it. It doesn't matter. You can work out the minutia on the model or the photo that you determine that you want to use. So I know this tug is approximately 80 feet long, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my HO scale ruler, and if I put this particular standard ruler up against it, I know that it begins here, and if I lay this on like this, I know that 80 feet where my thumb is approximately 11 inches, okay? So I'm going to put this just aside for now, and I'm going to take this ruler, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a grid. I only have a paper that's 11 inches wide for this. I'm not going to add another square to this. I actually need 12, but it doesn't matter because this is all you need to know, right? Like you can work that out when you draw your own grid. I know that my grid needs to be 11 inches because the boat is 80 feet at 11 inches in HO scale, right? See? This is how long my boat's going to be. This boat's a little bit longer than this paper, but I just said that you need an extra square. So you need to tape or make the paper larger to factor in the exact length of the boat, which is what I've already done on this drawing, but the back's cut off a bit because this is only 11 inches, okay? So what I do is I draw in 11 1-inch squares. It's 11 inches, 11 this way, and then 5 this way. Actually, it would be a good idea to put 6 to reach the very top of the mast, but that doesn't matter right now, okay? Now, when I have taken my photo like this, I did a black and white copy, toned it down a bit so I can draw the grid over top. Now, this grid is not the same size as 1 inch. It's actually 5/8. And the reason why is I need 11 symmetrical squares. Regardless of the size of this photo, it doesn't matter. There has to be 11, the same as this 11, and it has to be, in this case, 5 inch. They're 5 grids high. This is 5 grids high at 1 inch. This is 5 grids high at 5/8, right? Square. 11 5/8, 5 5/8 square grid, compared to the finished draft, which would be 11 squares by 5 high at 1 inch. This is what my build draft is going to be, which is going to ultimately look like this, okay? Now, here's the advantage of doing this. So when I look at this photo, okay, so I want to get this profile, this side dark profile here first, okay? So I know by this grid that the center is the number 6 row, right? Here. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Same on here. So I know in the number 6 row, which is here, this is where the flare begins, basically on this part of the boat. There's a flare where this gunwale goes up to the top deck here, okay? So I know that it goes above the second square, which is right here. See? And it's actually about halfway in between the squares. So it's a little bit higher than this, let's say, right? So it starts just off center to the left here, and it curves up. You can use a French square to draft that in. And then there's a slight shear, but not much, and it kind of goes like this. Okay? And then it tapers down, and I know that this part of the hull, like this low freeboard here, is actually around center of this square as well. So it's kind of runs in here like this. All the way back to, which should be another square right here, let's say. To the full length of the boat, like the transom where it rounds off. But for the purposes of the video, once again, I don't need that right now. Because I just want to show you roughly. Like, if you want to figure out the length of this tire, well, it's not a full inch. So you work that out with your HO scale ruler on this drawing, right? Because you know that each square in HO scale is about 7 feet, 7.5 feet. Because you're using this drawing, and now you can use your HO scale ruler because this is an HO scale model, right? So you can work out the fine minutia with your scale ruler. Like the width of a ladder, let's say, is 2.5 feet on a boat. Well, you can look there and see, yeah, okay. Or the width of a door, there'll be a door at the rear cab, is actually, they're 2.5 feet opposed to 3. You know, portholes, well, I don't really know the size, but I know I can put my HO ruler and say, oh, okay, it's 1.5 feet or 2-foot porthole, etc. Right? You can work in your own standards that way with your scale ruler off your build plan, which is actually this plan now. Okay. So now I know, like, I can do a rough draft. Like, this is a elevation. I have a plan somewhere else, but there's not much on it because I can work out a lot of this as I build the model. But you can see here that I cut out the side of this cab piece. I made some adjustments by studying the photos again, and then I now have a piece to cut my template for the side, a paper template. Okay, and then I also have an idea where this funnel goes. Okay, so if I look on this drawing, let's say, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I know roughly on my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually it falls in here roughly. Okay, and as you're drafting, you can pretty much look at the photo and the draft, and you can see if your proportions are close. And they're pretty close here, and if as you're building the model, you can adjust things to get your proportion and ratio right. So that's all I do. I do the same with everything, with buildings, whatever. I'm not talking about building an HO scale locomotive where you have a blueprint or a ship with a blueprint. That's different. That's a different game because the drawing's already done for you. But in this case, most of the subjects that we see in life that are unique, there are no drawings for. And if there are, then you got to spend the time to research to find them. And if that's what you like to do, then do it. But I don't have time for that now. In my retirement, I'm not interested in that. So that's how I get a rough draft so I can begin to build this boat with, which we're going to do in the next part. This is the introduction. I wanted to cover this just so you know how this process works and how you can apply this grid over top of a building or anything, even anatomy. Like a human being is broken down into squares. You can break down any shape, like a circle, into squares as well, within one big square and then a grid. So depending on the scale of the grid, from the photo to the drawing, you can do just about anything within a reasonable accuracy. Okay, so we're going to jump in. Like part 1 will be the beginning of this. I'll show you right from the waterline through the whole build how to build this particular tug, the Seaspan Corsair. Okay, so just so you know, to your advantage, get as many photographs as you can of your subject so you can refer different angles and so on to make your adjustments with. And you'll end up with enough material where you can pretty much build a fairly reasonable model from a photo this way. It's the same way I did the barge slip, the warehouses, even trees. I do the same thing, right? I use a scale grid roughly just to, and if I want to compress, then I just compress the actual model within the grid or whatever. So once you get used to using this method, you can build a model of anything that's reasonable, okay, for the purposes of a model railroad layout or diorama, etc. Okay?